Okay, if we haven't met before, my name is Oisin Lunny. It's an old Irish name. It's very difficult to spell and pronounce, unless you're from Ireland, in which case it's the most obvious thing in the world. I speak at a lot of events. I do a lot of this kind of thing, event emceeing, and the reason I love it, because you get to meet some of the most interesting people in the world who can sum up some of the most complex ideas very, very quickly and succinctly. Now, one of the best summaries I've heard around cybersecurity was a gentleman I met at a financial services conference, and he said, we think of security like leaving a car on the street and it's got an alarm. Somebody might walk past it and they'll see it, and then if they break in, the alarm goes off. It is not like this in the digital world. It's completely the opposite. To use the car metaphor, it's like there's a crazy guy in the boot of the car and he is trying to kill you every minute of the day, and he never sleeps. And he's got teams of agile developers and they use kind of Scrum and Sprint methodology. There is no rest for cybersecurity. It is a big deal. So I'm delighted to be joined now to discuss the real business USP that is cybersecurity by two fantastic experts from companies who are really household names. To the big screen, I would like to welcome first Ignacio Arnaldo, who is the principal data scientist at Corelight. So Ignacio, you're there. A big round of applause for Ignacio, please. Thank you. Wonderful. And by the magic of technology, to our other screen here, we're going to welcome Raj Samani, who's the chief scientist at McAfee Enterprise. Raj, welcome. Great to see you.
Hey, good afternoon.
Okay, amigos, well, listen, welcome to the virtual stage at South Summit. I'm going to moderate this conference. We're going to have a chat about cybersecurity. We've got the clock going for 20 minutes. Thank you very much. And I would just love it if each of you could just talk a bit about your specific role at your company, what you do, just so the folks who are joining us here in Lenave and online via the live and on-demand streams can get to know you a bit. So we're going to start with yourself, Ignacio.
Well, so first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And perhaps before explaining my role, I can also give like a little bit of a background about Corelight, because I understand not everyone might be familiar with it. Corelight is a startup that is based in San Francisco, in Silicon Valley. And it's mostly a network visibility solution that is built around an open source project called Zeek. And Zeek has a lot of history as an open source project. It's like 20 plus years. And the idea is that it provides a very rich metadata about all the network traffic that happens in an organization, right? So by doing that, it enables other workflows, like it enables incident response and threat hunting based on that set of rich data. Now that said, the company is evolving and it's going towards an open NDR vision where it's not only providing ease of deployment and maintenance of Zeek, of the open source project, but it's also integrating with other tools like Suricata, providing packet capture functionality, and it's also providing a layer of content, of detections and insights on top of the network data. And that's where I come in. I mostly work in building detections to identify attacks based on analysis of different data sources.
Fantastic.
My background is also in data science and machine learning, so that's my go-to tool generally, but I'm not limited to that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Muchas gracias. Okay, and over to your good self, Raj. Talk to us a bit about what your role involves, and also a quick summary of McAfee, of course, for obviously a household name, but good to get it from your good self.
Yeah, so it's McAfee Enterprise now. So we're a dedicated enterprise company. And my role is really very simple. I run the teams that basically go after the bad guys. We work with law enforcement. We look to infiltrate how they operate. And we use that to gather not only intelligence to make sure that our products are smart, but also to take them out. I mean, we actively work with law enforcement to try to disrupt or get these people behind bars as quickly as we can.
Excellent. Okay, so that's set the scene for us here today, and for all the folks streaming in from home, hello, hello. So let's just kind of start with a bit of an overview, a bit of a big picture, and I'll come to yourself first, Raj. Talk to us about the kind of cyber attacks that we're witnessing at the moment, the scale of the cyber attacks. What does this practically mean for a business? What kind of impact can it have?
Well, I don't want to oversell this, but it's a matter of life and death.
Right. Yes.
And we've seen examples where hospitals are unable to give patient care. We've seen examples where entire cities are held hostage unless somebody goes out and pays. I mean, in the past, having a cybersecurity issue meant maybe your computers ran slowly. Now, patients are not getting care. Now, people can no longer access critical services. And also, we've even seen attacks where people are no longer getting power in their homes. And so, this is an impact, or this is not cybersecurity, but this is an attack on our way of life.
Absolutely. And, we kind of mentioned, we've been hearing all day today at the playground stage about the impact of artificial intelligence, the impact of agile development and, kind of big data. All this stuff is going into the mix for corporates, but also for hackers. Now, Ignacio, talk to us a bit about the impact of all this kind of very fast-moving, massive new technology and what it's doing to the sphere of cybersecurity. What does it mean for the folks in the room here at South Summit?
Well, I think there's certainly impact of artificial intelligence in the solutions that are provided for cybersecurity. And I think as opposed to having like whole new products that are AI focused, what I see is that AI is being embedded in many of those solutions. Right? Like for example, for detection purposes, we're seeing that most SIEMs or other platforms that are used, that generally do rule analysis or log analytics, they are embedding some AI and machine learning capabilities. And I think that's the way to go, because in the cybersecurity space, there are many products that are very consolidated, that have like a ton of functionality that has been built over many, many years, right? And there are also a lot of processes and organizations have built their processes around those products, so they're very, very difficult to replace. So in my opinion, it's just like improvements of efficiency in different aspects of that people, tech, process or equation. I see a lot of opportunities for detection myself, but there's also a lot of opportunities for automation, and that could be artificial intelligence or other tooling. But a lot of the work that ends up doing to remediate attacks and to investigate attacks is very repetitive, and we could cut down by a lot with AI or some degree of automation.
Indeed, very good point. Thank you. And coming over to yourself, Raj, it does sound a bit like we've kind of got a race of AI against AI, agile development against agile development. The hackers are using all of the techniques that large global tech enterprises are doing, and maybe even some of the same people. Who knows? How do we, kind of get involved in this AI race? And how do you at McAfee kind of make a difference and make sure you're a step ahead?
AI is a tremendous technology, and it might be the silver bullet. But I've always said not every threat's a werewolf. Mm-hmm. In other words, what I mean by that is we assume that hackers are developing, the latest algorithms, the latest attacks, but in most cases, the most successful attacks are actually achieved by really very simple measures. I mean, I'll give you a great case in point. I was a primary on an incident response case recently. And I was talking to the organization and I said, look, the bad guys have been in your network for 9 months. And they responded to me and said, well, you should have seen that. And I said, well, yeah, admittedly, we did warn you about it. But the fact is, the password to get inside your network was welcome123. And we laugh about it, but when we work with law enforcement on the disruption of a RDP shop, basically RDP is one of the most common vectors for ransomware. We gathered the passwords, and do you know the most common password used that was being sold by criminals? Any ideas?
It's not password, is it?
I mean, it's a trick question because there was no password.
Oh my God! Right.
And that's the reality of the world that we live in. We kind of build up this image of 0 days and nation state hackers and the most capable ransomware groups. But by and large, most of these groups, maybe except for 2 or 3 that I've witnessed, are loud, are noisy, and exploiting very common mechanisms that, quite frankly, should have been stopped. And so, I think the discussion about AI is really important. But likewise, it allows us to kind of lose sight of what's actually happening. And what's actually happening is that the basic cyber hygiene that exists out there on the internet and by most companies is actually weak. And quite frankly, anybody with access to a computer can take part in cybercrime and make millions.
Yeah, I mean, from what you're saying there, it's very much sounds like AI, big data, all these new tools are very much part of the picture, but there's a fundamental single point of failure, which is, us humans. We do dumb things like we don't set passwords, the policies aren't in place, the C-suite aren't kind of engaging with cybersecurity. Coming over to yourself, Ignacio, how do you think that one can embed cybersecurity best practice within, small, medium, large organizations? Is there anything you see from your perspective that we really need to push ahead?
Well, I think, of course, like the usual tools like firewalls and access controls and so on needs to be in place. So that is for sure, that is the basics. And the more detection mechanisms we can implement, the better. But also a very important piece is visibility afterwards, right? Like we all know that either because of human mistakes or just because technology is moving and there are always going to be new blind spots, right? Things are going to happen, right? Attacks are going to be there. So what are the when those bad things happen, how do we investigate? How do we remediate? How do we improve for the future, right? And that's why I see that there are tools that provide visibility. Like, I mean, Corelight is an example for networks, right? There are others for EDR, for cloud applications and so on that are generating very rich set of logs. How can we better organize all of that and extract value out of it for the future? And taking a step back into the previous point of it looks like it's becoming easier to become an attacker, right? Also from a defensive perspective, how do we as a community get together to improve the situation, right? Because that's one of the key challenges for me, especially as a data scientist in cybersecurity, is that I rarely have access to what's going on, to the real data that contains the attack and that would help me build a better detection models moving forward, right? And it could be companies like McAfee or companies like that do have access to that can build it. But in my opinion, there is an opportunity for a broader community that can collaborate. It's always difficult because of policy and regulations, right? But I think we need to make an effort to push in that direction, so that we can also make it very easy to become a defender.
Indeed. And Raj, in terms of your work with massive global corporations, enterprise level, is there a kind of struggle with the education at the C-suite level? Because I know historically security seems to be something that people think is somebody else's responsibility. It's like IT will look after that, so-and-so will look after that. But then you have the CEO leaving the laptop open and phishing attacks coming because it's been compromised. How does, McAfee, how do you get involved in that cultural space, in that education space?
Well, so I think it's a deeper problem. I mean, let me ask you a question. How many CEOs of Fortune 100, Fortune 5,000 companies do you know that have actually come from a security background?
Indeed.
Not one. And that, I think, in part is the challenge, because cybersecurity is seen as an IT problem. It's seen as an IT issue, and invariably they're either reporting up to a CFO or they're reporting up to a CIO. But my argument has always been, what we're talking about is an organization, which every organization is digital, their ability to be able to innovate, their ability to be able to adopt new technologies, to be able to move faster than everybody else in a safe and secure fashion. We haven't discussed the Facebook issue yesterday, but if you think about it, every organization is dependent on their technology. Well, at some point, you've got to start to look at security as not just, IT security where you're installing antivirus, but actually a fundamental part of the way that you do business. And so for me, a lot of the challenges that we face culturally is really for us as an industry to move away from terms like APT and DDoS and stuff that doesn't mean anything to the business, and actually integrate with senior leadership of the business to find ways to innovate. And actually, it is happening now. In oil and gas, for example, we've seen the adoption of digital oil fields with security at the heart of what they do. So, for me, I think security still has some way to go to kind of be in the boardroom. But look, CISO once said to me, I'm the person that briefs the board more than anybody else. So we know that the board are concerned, but likewise, we've got to at least have them part of the discussion rather than just briefing.
Absolutely. So it's like cybersecurity is the elephant in every boardroom. We need more CSOs in the boardroom, and kind of to have security embedded throughout an organization, every single employee. I totally agree. Now, but security is by its nature, it's secretive, it's proprietary, it's kind of closed walls. You don't really, in the most part, this is kind of how we might think of it, because obviously, there's a perception that the more you're on the cloud, the more you're exposed, which I know is erroneous. So, or maybe it's erroneous, provided you've taken the right measures. But coming over to yourself, Ignacio, talk to us a bit about the role of open source and ecosystems in improving cybersecurity. What's the opportunity? What are the things to look out for? What do people need to know?
Well, I'm going to try to touch on a few points because it's a very, very broad question, right? I think at the most basic level, there is open source, or at least a sense of community when it comes to sharing intelligence about attacks, right? And so that's one aspect. And there's also some projects that I follow closely where they're not just sharing like specific information about actors, but they're also providing like more generic detection mechanisms like rules and so on. To me, that is all promising. And then there's the whole ecosystem of tools that are actually open source projects. Zeek is one example, but Suricata there are others, right? And I think I like it because it touches on a very critical point. Just before we were saying that organizations need to be more aware of cybersecurity, but I think also people that build the tech need to be more aware of cybersecurity, because it's surprising, but software engineers, very rarely they're security experts, and they might not know the implications of what they're coding, right? And many times people build new technology. You mentioned the cloud, but it could be any other technology, right? Without really understanding the cybersecurity implications, right? So being open source is a way to collect that feedback, and it's a way to improve very quickly. So rather than building, if there are entrepreneurs in the audience, right? Rather than building something and then understanding whether it's compliant, whether it has cybersecurity flaws and so on, open source is a way to get very early feedback and to build tools that are very robust and that are, in the end, ready and mature.
Right, and it strikes me. You mentioned earlier the Facebook hack. Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp was down. The streets of Madrid were full of people looking at these kind of useless bricks last night. It was incredible, and my heart does go out to folks who were trying to organise everything for South Summit today. And WhatsApp was the main channel. They did an amazing job. It's just been brilliant. Cybersecurity is not an issue until it really, really is, and then it's the issue, and nothing else can happen. So, Raj, is there anything that you come across repeatedly when you go into scenarios with major global enterprises, and the whatchamacallit has hit the fan, and they really are panicking, and the building's burning down? What's a bit of advice that you find yourself giving again and again, and you wish more people knew about?
Well, so actually, before I answer that question, I just want to maybe pick up on a point you said, which was cybersecurity is not a problem until it is. Well, cybersecurity is always an issue, and sometimes the impact of certain malicious campaigns we don't even know about, or we don't certainly experience it. I mean, of course, you talk about ransomware; it's very obvious, but as you can tell from my wonderful accent, I'm in London. And of course, we're dealing with the fallout of Brexit. Well, wow. Hey, look, we know that there's been malicious campaigns used to influence the vote of Brexit. We know that there have been foreign actors that have been using social media as a vehicle to influence elections. And so cybersecurity is not about, it's not always just about the computer and the software, but actually it's the way that we govern society. And I think, the sooner that we acknowledge this, the better I think that will be. And I think in answer to the question, like when there's been a breach or when there's been an attack, my recommendation in every single instance is, well, look, let's just pause for a second, take a deep breath, and tried to understand the scale of the issue and the scope of the attack. We dealt with a case recently in which the attacker had free run of the network for 3 months, but actually they needed to have that run because we needed to understand what they had access to. They'd been in there for 7 years. So, I think for me, it's a case of just, I think, being calm and actually working through the plans that you've been developing all of this time for this very instance.
100%. And thank you for mentioning all of those campaigns around the Brexit vote. I lived in the UK for 27 years myself, including a wonderful time in London. I watched all of this unfold with absolute horror. And I suspect a lot is going to come out in the future. And of course, somebody like yourself would have a good amount of inside visibility on what's going to come out. So thank you there. So, it's about education. It's about digital transformation. It's about changing the culture. It's about open source. It's about proprietary. But Ignacio, talk to us a bit about, is it an option just to unplug all of your network cables and just do everything offline and just, can a business even do that this day? Or are we're connected now, we got to improve our security?
Well, obviously, I don't think it's an option. I think business need to emerge and survive, right? And cybersecurity is there to make sure that's the case, right? And I think that's probably one of the longer term problems, right? Is that as technologies evolve and people change how they operate, there are going to be those blind spots that we need to be aware of, right? So it goes back to the culture. We need to be very cognizant of cybersecurity issues when we're building those new tools, and make sure that we don't first create a problem that we need then to solve, right? That we upfront, we know all those implications and understand the best practices.
Indeed. So words to live by from both of you there. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Ladies and gentlemen, and folks tuning in from home, please give a big round of applause for Ignacio Arnaldo from Corelight and Raj Samani from McAfee Enterprise. Thank you so much.